What's up, SLO City Church? How you doing this morning? Sorry, I'm so used to it, the reverberation. This is a new experience for me. I've never been able to have a moment to teach outside, so this is new. So can you help me out this morning? I'd like to hear your voices. How are you doing this morning? There we go. Man, it is such an honor and privilege to be hanging out with SLO City Church. We have heard so much about you at Real Life Church, and so it is such an honor. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Michael, and I get the privilege of being one of the teaching pastors at Real Life Church in Valencia, California. And so we partner. One of my responsibilities is to hang out and partner with our church planners in SLO City Churches, one of the church plants that we partner with. And speaking of the church, can we give it up for your lead pastor, Brent Bremer? Man, we love Brent at Real Life Church, and so if he's watching at some point online, just want to let you know, Brent, thanks for having me here. Greatly appreciate it, and so glad to be here. Well, my family and I are actually very familiar with SLO. We actually served at a really great church, just a little hop and a skip north here in Paso Robles, California, at Highlands Church, and so we have just a fond memory of coming down to SLO all the time and eating at Novo's, which is our favorite restaurant. It's super delicious. And last night we had Eureka, and we watched Cal Poly try really hard to win their game yesterday. And so if you go to Cal Poly, I'm sorry. I appreciate your effort last night. Well, let me tell you about my family. I am just beyond blessed and humbled that the Lord has given me such a beautiful wife. Her name is Erica, and we've been together for 15 years and married for almost 12 years. Sorry, I forgot to start my timer here. I want to make sure I keep you guys on time. And we've been almost married for 12 years, and it's an Applebee's love story. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? When we were sitting on our date at Applebee's, I said to her, you know, honey, we're fancy like Applebee's on a date night. We got that Bourbon Street steak with the Oreo shake. We got some whipped cream with 2 on top, 2 straws, 1 check. Baby, I got you. And from that point, she said, I'm never leaving you again, right? No, actually, we actually worked at Applebee's. That's how it all started. We actually worked at Applebee's, and she didn't like me. She thought I was weird. And I didn't like her because I thought she was rude. And then one day I made a joke, and she kind of snickered at it. And you could tell how old I am. You used the word snickered, right? Okay, so she laughed, and then it was kind of a love story after that. And our very first date was at Applebee's because we worked there and we got a discount, right? Listen, we were in college. You got to take advantage of that, right? Can I get an amen from the college students out there, right? So we met at Applebee's. We have 3 beautiful kids. We have a 13-year-old named Kira. Pray for me. She is sassy. We have a 9-year-old named Ashlyn and a 7-year-old named Cohen. And but beyond that, the greatest thing you should know about me, something even greater than being married to my beautiful wife and having 3 amazing kids, is that I am the biggest Kentucky basketball fan in the world. Okay? Go Wildcats. All right? That's why your lead pastor and I can be such good friends, because we share a kindred spirit of loving the Big Blue Nation. But if this is your first time here, or first time in a long time, we're continuing a series called Habits. And the premise of this series is that we do things over and over again. And some of the things that we do without thinking. We just do it automatically. And what we've come to understand about those habits is that they form the person that we are. You could actually say that they end up defining us. So our hope in this series is to help each of us to develop habits of hope, of practices and rhythm that are rooted and developed in the truth and the way of Jesus. And so today, we're going to talk about the habit of thought, okay? So last summer, I discovered something really unusual about our house. Now, the thing you have to understand is when it comes to fixing things in our house, if it's electronic like computers or tablets or TV, anything like that, I'm the guy you ask, okay? But if it comes to like furniture toys, or anything that is not have wires or stuff in it, don't ask me. I will break it. Ask my wife. She is literally like the handyman of all handy women, okay? It is the strangest thing. I remember this one time, she called me from work. She called me and said, hey, something's wrong with our washing machine, okay? And I said, okay, well, I'll call the washing machine fixer person, whatever, okay? And my wife's like, why would you do that? And I'm like, because I don't know how to fix it. And she was like, I'll figure this out. And I'm like, okay, honey, listen, you could do a lot of amazing things, but you're not going to fix a laundry machine, okay? That's just not happening. Literally, 2 hours later, I come home and I walk in our garage and our laundry machine is tore apart. I mean, just pieces everywhere. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're not going to have laundry. I'm going to have to go to work smelling bad. People are not going to like me. They're not going to love Jesus. They're going to go to hell. Oh my gosh. All because the laundry machine is all taken apart. So I start getting online and I'm looking up like people to call. And then maybe about an hour later, I walk back in and she's washing our clothes. And I was like, how in the world did you do that? And she wouldn't tell me her secret till this day. This is how she keeps me around, okay? And so, anyway, that when it comes to fixing stuff like that, that's my wife. So last summer, we discovered something really unusual that neither of us could figure out, okay? There is a ceiling fan in our house that, like, when you walk into the door, what we call the front living room of our house, there's a ceiling fan. And it was really hot, so we were turning on the fans. It would not turn on. Like, literally would not turn on. We tried every single switch downstairs to, like, turn this thing on. We even reset the power to the whole house, which is terrible when you got stuff plugged in, okay? We reset the house. We got on YouTube, which is where everybody goes to fix anything, right, is YouTube. We couldn't figure it out. By accident, I was upstairs in our master bedroom closet, and I saw this switch, and I was like, what is this switch? Behind the door in our master bedroom closet. I hit it, and my wife goes, hey, the fan's on! And I was like, no, this is really crazy, this echo. I was like, no, that's not possible. So I turned it off. Sure enough, the fan went off. So what we discovered is the master bedroom switch, master closet switch controls the switch downstairs, which controls the ceiling fan. Did you guys get that? Because it took me a while to figure that out, okay? So let me just do it one more time. Make sure you understand. The master bedroom, master closet switch behind the door in the master bedroom of the master closet controls the switch downstairs that controls the ceiling fan in the front half of the house. Okay, you got that. Okay. Here's why I tell you about that. Because what's incredibly comparable is that we as humans can do the same things within our own minds. I mean, just think about the last bad decision you ever made. I don't know if you've ever done anything like this. Let me give you a couple of mine. Maybe you decided that you know what? I'm going to get our spending under control. Like, we've been spending a little too much. We're going to stick to a monthly budget, which is a really good idea, right? And then you book a trip for some reason to Tampa to watch your favorite college basketball team lose in the second round. And now your budget is blown up. And you're like, why did I do that? Right? Okay, how about this one? Maybe you're like me and you enjoy Coca-Cola, not the drugs, okay? Calm down. Y'all like, whoa, this pastor is risque, okay? Coca-Cola. Maybe you like me and you enjoy Coca-Cola and you like to have, a normal amount, 7 or 8 cans a day, okay? All right? And so you decide, you know what? I'm going to get healthy. I'm going to cut back my intake of Coca-Cola. Having 8 cans a day is probably not the best idea. And then, so you go good. You're like, man, you've gone 40 days. You've had 1 can of Coke in 40 days. You're doing really good. And then you sit down and you watch your favorite college basketball team lose to St. Peter's in the first round. And then you realize you're 10 cans deep in Coca-Cola that day, right? You're like, why did I do that? Maybe you're a parent and you want to be more patient at home. And the pandemic's going crazy, right? And you want to stop losing your temper with your kids and your spouses. And then you suddenly have to figure out how to homeschool your kids and virtual learning. And your kids are swinging from the ceiling fan that's not working. And you lose your cool and you snap. And you say things to them that you wish you could take back, right? Maybe you're a college student and you know that cheating is terrible. You shouldn't do it. But then that person in front of you leaves their answer so visibly, they're just inviting you to look at them, right? Now listen, I'll be the first to admit that many of these things, especially the first two, I've done for sure. But we always find ourselves afterwards thinking to ourselves, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Well, let me tell you, the answer is simple, yet it's really complex to get our understanding around. Here's the very simple answer. Our wires get crossed in our brain. Here's what we're learning about our brains. When we have a thought, our brains create these things called neural pathways. So if you're a psychologist or a medical professional and I say something wrong, just tell me later. Don't tell me right now, okay? But I did some study on this, okay? We have these things. When we have a thought, we create these neural pathways. And these pathways are just like walking on a trail that's right over here, right? The more you walk on that trail, the more what? Familiar that trail becomes. You just do it by easy. It becomes so natural. And just like walking on a trail, in the same way, these neural pathways make it easier and easier to think a thought over and over again. Now, when we're thinking really good thoughts and helpful thoughts, well, then it becomes a benefit. But the problem is that we aren't often thinking good and helpful thoughts. That's why it can be so easy for us to give into our impulses and make bad decisions. Because somewhere in our life, our brain has become rewired in that way. Now, the good news that we're also learning is that until you take your last breath, your brain is still growing, which means you can change the thoughts that you're having. A fascinating fact is that our brains are actually growing and can change over time. And you can prove this because every time we think a new thought, it becomes easier to think that thought over and over again. And this speaks to what one of Jesus' followers, a guy by the name of Paul, what he wrote to a group of Christians who were living in a city called Corinth. Here's what he wanted them to understand. He said, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. You see, we have the ability in Jesus to demolish every argument and pretension that sets itself up against the truth of God. Now, this is like an electrician coming in and rewiring the faulty electric job in our brain. We can literally rewire our brain and train it to think new and better thoughts. We can, as Paul writes, take our thoughts captive. We can make them obedient to the truth that Jesus speaks over us. Now, if I were you at this moment, I'd be like, okay, so how do we do that? Okay, because that sounds really awesome. I'd love to get rid of these bad thoughts. And I want to tell you how, but before we do that, I want to add just a small disclaimer, okay? I know that there are many of us here today and maybe watching online later whose thought life is not so easily controlled by ourselves, because there are these imbalances in our brains that lead to things like clinical depression that can make controlling our thought life really difficult. And if that is you, if you would identify with what I just said, can I just tell you that it's okay? There should be no shame and no ridicule for what you are dealing with. It's okay to not be okay. And if you're seeking out medical or professional help and expertise, that's 100% okay. I guarantee you the pastors and staff and volunteers here at Soul City Church want to walk with you in that. So what I offer today is not like a get out of jail quick scheme, but I offer some advice and wisdom from the scriptures that will help you begin the process of thinking and having a habit of better thoughts, okay? So with that being said, here's what I want to do. I want to take a look at this letter from our guy Paul, who wrote to a bunch of followers in this city called Philippi. Now let me give you a little bit of background on this letter here, because Paul wrote this letter from prison that he was put in unfairly by Roman standards, okay? And by Roman standards, the conditions of this prison was terrible. It was horrible. And it could have been very easy for Paul to write and say things like, man, I'm giving up, or I'm done with all of this, and I never thought any of this would happen. It's so unfair that God would do this to me. Woe is me. My life is terrible. But he actually, instead of writing that, he actually writes about the joy he has over and over. And what he tells them, and he's telling us, is to not let our anxiety get the best of us. He then, at the very end of the letter, this is what he writes. He says one final thing to encourage them. He says, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Now, Paul, he's basically designed this filter for us, okay? In which all of our thoughts should come through. So if whatever we're thinking, if it passes the filter of these things, then it's good to keep thinking. If it doesn't, we should do whatever we can to make those thoughts obedient to the truth that Jesus speaks over us. So when we have a thought, the question we need to be asking is that thought true? Is it fact, and does it match up with reality? Is it honorable? Is this thought worthy of me giving honor to it? Is it right? Is it a good thought? Is it pure? Is it a wholesome thought? Is it lovely? Is the thought beautiful? Is it admirable? Is this a respectable thought to be having? Is it excellent? Does this thought meet the standard of outstanding? And is this thought worthy of praise? Is it worthy of my gratitude? If it meets those standards, if it's one of those things, then we should think it. And why does Paul recommend this? Because every time we think a thought, remember, it becomes easier and easier to think that thought again. And if you think that thought long enough, it becomes the default thought in your brain. If I may put it this way, your life is moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. Think about that. If you notice the decisions you're making and you're wondering, why do I keep making those decisions? Take a second to think about the thoughts you're having. And I guarantee you would find that your life has been moving. The decisions that you've been making have been moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. You see, Paul understood that. He understood that if we have nothing but negative and impulsive, selfish pathways, then we're only going to have negative, impulsive, and selfish decisions. But if we choose a new way of thought and we fix ourselves on those thoughts, it creates new pathways which will lead to different decisions and outcomes. And another reason why Paul recommends this filter is because these are really the thoughts of God. Think about that. That when you think of things that are pure and honorable and lovely and admirable, you're thinking the very way that God thinks. Now, getting back to this, how to do this part, another translation puts this verse in this way. It says this. It says, if there is any virtue or if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Now, you see that word meditate. And the tendency that I hear all the time is, well, is that like the new age thinking and chanting and just clearing our minds and emptying ourselves? No, that's not what Paul talks about, okay? When you see this word meditate, I want you to think of the phrase training your mind. You see, when we meditate, we are basically training our minds very much like we exercise our bodies, okay? Now, we always want to exercise our bodies, and when we exercise it, it makes us feel healthy. Now, I'll tell you right now, I have not done a good job I've put on the dad 40, as they call it, right? Okay, when I became a dad, my belly is not as good. If my wife was here, she'll be here at second service, she would be totally embarrassed that I just did that. But when we exercise, we help our bodies get better. Now, most mental health experts will tell you that your physical health is 80% food and 20% exercise. Our minds are the same way. Our minds are the same in that it's not just what you do with your minds, but it's also what you put in your minds. So meditation is focusing our minds and our brains and filling it with the truth of God. One of the guys who wrote some of the first half in the Bible, who became a man that God describes as a man after his own heart, his name was David. He wrote about this idea of meditating several times. Look at one of his thoughts. In Psalms chapter 119, he says, I meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. I delight in your decrees, and I will not neglect your word. Now, precepts basically mean rules. These are God's commandments that we see in the first part of the Bible. And what David is saying is that he's going to focus his mind and his thoughts on God's ways and understand that God's way is the best way for him. David would go on to say, I remember the days long ago. I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done. You see, this is not about emptying our minds and leaving it empty. What David is doing and showing us is that we fill our minds with God's truth. We're thinking about God's presence, God's goodness. His works are filling our minds up with the thoughts of God. Why? Because remember, our lives are always moving in the direction of our strongest thoughts. And if a thought comes into your mind, you create a pathway for it, right? And it will eventually come out in your life. What goes in always finds a way of coming out. And the thoughts that you're taking in will eventually find their way out verbally, physically, emotionally, mentally. You see, your thoughts matter because they are shaping you. And we have to do whatever we can to get our thoughts to a place where they are shaping us for the good. Why? Because if we can't control the way we think, then we'll never control what we do. If we cannot control the way we think, we'll never control what we do. So, let's talk about some practical ways that you can begin rewiring your brain and filling your minds with the thoughts of God. So if you're taking notes, I have just 3 things, okay? So here's the first one. Identify the stronghold that's holding you back. Identify the stronghold that's holding you back. Here's what I mean. A stronghold is a lie that we believe that is affecting the direction of our lives. So thoughts like, you know what, I'll never be good enough, or I can't trust anyone anymore, or if I find the right person, that's when I'll be happy. You know what that is? That is the upstairs master bedroom closet switch controlling the downstairs ceiling fan. It makes no sense. The wires have been crossed, and we start identifying with that lie. Like, oh yeah, that's who I am. I'll never be happy. I'll never be good enough, right? We have to identify that stronghold. And once we identify the lie, then here's what we have to do. We have to replace the stronghold with God's truth. Once we identify that stronghold, we have to replace it with God's truth. It isn't enough to just identify the lie and try to get rid of it. No, that's emptying our minds and leaving it empty. What we have to do is empty our minds of that lie and replace it with the truth that God says about us in our minds. Hence, meditation. We capture that lie and we make it obedience to the words of Jesus, which then fills our minds with the truth of God. And this will begin to develop a new pathway in our brains. Now, once we've done that, here's what we should do. We should write it down, okay? We should write this truth down. You see, and I don't know how you all learn, but I'm somebody that I have to visually see it. So I have to write stuff down. Writing it down causes us to focus more on the truth because it leads us down this new pathway over and over again. And not only does it lead us down one pathway, but it creates new pathways in our brain, which will in turn create new habits, new decision making, and behavior choices. Now, here's how this is important, and I'm gonna spell out this process for you. Okay, you're gonna write it, then think it, then speak it until you believe it. Okay, I'll say it again. You're gonna write it, then think it, then speak it until you believe it, okay? And I want you to say that with me, all right? Ready? We're going to write it, then we're going to think it, then we're going to speak it until we believe it. One more time. Write it, think it, speak it until we believe it. Here's what's happening when you do that. Scientifically speaking, from what I understand, we are creating a new neural pathway. We're basically charting a new trail in our brains. Spiritually speaking, from my expertise, we are letting the thoughts of God fill our minds up. We are taking every thought captive and making it obedient to Jesus. We are focusing our minds on everything that is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely. Everything that is admirable excellent and worthy of praise. So when a good thought comes to your mind, or when you're replacing a bad thought with God's truth, I want you to write it down. Then I want you to think it over and over again. Then I want you to speak it out loud to yourself. You know, when you wake up in the morning and your breath is bad, you don't want to be talking to anybody else, and you're staring yourself in the mirror, that's the perfect time to say, you are loved by God. You are valued. God is for you. You are not defined by your past mistakes. Jesus died specifically for you. Those thoughts over and over and over again. Write it, think it, speak it until it becomes the very thought that permeates your mind over and over again. Now, I'm sure that each of you and each of us struggle from time to time with lies that have been told to us, about us, or even lies that we've told ourselves about ourselves to ourselves. Now, I can tell you this, my wife can tell you that there is no harsher critic of me than me. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. If anybody's an Enneagram out there, I'm a 3, which means I live in my own worst mind. Okay, I want to look good and sound good and be the best foot forward. And so everything I do, like seriously, the moment I get off this stage, I'm going to go back there. You're all going to say hi to me and all like this stuff. And the moment I get a quiet time, I'm going to critique and tear myself down. I just know it. It's just who I am. And over the years, I have tried, and I'm working and trying to process, how do I have a better thought life? How do I do this better? How do I meditate on the things that God wants me to know? And so what I did a few years ago is I did this very thing. I started to search the Bible for what was it that God was saying about me. And there were 3 words that kept coming up over and over again that I essentially began to make the core values of my life. And so I wrote them down and I put them on this plaque or this thing, and I framed it, and it sits above my office in front of my desk. I can't ignore it. I see it every morning. And so every morning I walk into my office in my house, I sit there, and before I do anything else, I read that through because I want to be reminded of who God says I am. And those 3 words were humble, hungry, and healthy. God has called me to be humble, hungry, and healthy. And then what I did is I put some what I call keystone behaviors or things that really let me know if I'm living this out. And so with humble, I want to operate out of a posture of service rather than being served. That in everything I do, as I serve God, as I serve my wife, as I serve my kids and my friends and my church, I want to be of service and not served. So in everything I do, if I am living this out, I am serving people. I am giving my time, my talent, and my resources so that God's people can be further advanced. With hungry, it was, I will always be open to the Lord's leading. Wherever God calls me, I will put, as my friend Jody says, I will put my yes on the table. I will put my yes on the table. God, whatever you want, whatever you're asking me, my yes is already on the table. And what that has led is us moving to California, and then moving to Indiana, and then moving to Kentucky, and then moving to California again. God has called us all over the place. We have been through some amazing things, some really tough things, all because I said, God, I want to be hungry for what you want me to do. And then healthy is that I will live out my spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical health in a way that honors God and honors my family. And so any thought that comes to my mind that is not meeting those 3 things, I have to take captive. And I have to hold them in and keep wrestling with them. As I come to an end here, I just want to tell you guys, I want the same for you. Okay? I want the same for you. I want you to follow David and Paul's lead and meditate on what God says about you. And not what others say about you. Because everybody has an opinion about you. Everybody has an opinion about how you should look and what you should dress, what careers you should have, or college you should go to, who you should be dating, who you shouldn't be dating, what sports teams you should be fans of, Kentucky basketball, anything like that. We all have opinions about how you should live your life, but none of it matters. The only thing that matters is what God thinks and wants from you. That's how you should define your life. So if you're with somebody who's telling you that, they don't know if they can be with you because you're not this and that, say bye-bye. USC, peace out. If you're going to a place and they're saying that you have to be this and have this identity, all right, that's great, awesome. Because I know who God has called and asked me to be. That is all that matters in this life. That is all that should matter to you. When you create a good habit of making your thoughts obedient to Jesus, let me tell you, you will begin to see God do some incredible things in your life. Why? Because he loves you and he values you. And he wants your life to be moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. Isn't your life worth that? Let me pray for you this morning. Jesus, thank you so much for who you are. We're so grateful for you, God. And Lord, as that beautiful sound of the airplane flies over, Lord, if there's anyone today, God, that has been saying, you know what, my thought has not been the thoughts of God. God, would you help them? Would you show them the beautiful thoughts that you have about them? And Lord, maybe there's someone here today, God, that says, you know what, I've not been following the thoughts of God because I don't know God. Well, Lord, if that's them, Lord, would you inspire them to say yes to you today? To follow you today, to give your life to them, to you today, God. Thank you, Jesus, for who you are. We pray this in Jesus' name, and everybody said,